It's fantastic to have so many participants from all across Europe, and I think all across the world, actually. After 1 year sitting in front of our computers in each of our countries and homes, it is really appreciated that you have chosen to spend the next hour with us to hear about the challenges and the opportunities that the fintech sector is now facing in the UK. But before we start, I would very much like to introduce and thank our speakers. First of all, Filippa Martinelli from the Department for International Trade. Secondly, Irina Mohogitny from the Bank of England. Thirdly, Martin Cook from Burges Salmon. And last but not least, Carly Nimmo from Treasury. It's a really impressive and very diverse panel. The UK has long been at the forefront of innovation in financial services. In recent years, strong government support, a forward-leading approach to regulation, and access to skills and capital have fueled the fintech's rapid growth in the UK and also its expansion globally. And as you know, the UK is home to powerhouses such as TransferWise, Starling, Onfido, Monzo, Checkout.com, and Revolut. In fact, today, the UK represents over 10% of the global market share for fintech. And as a global fintech leader, the UK is seeking to strengthen its position in the international scene. And to achieve this, there is a key role to be played by the entire ecosystem of fintech, both the policymakers, the regulators, the institutions, the industry bodies, and naturally also the fintech companies themselves. A series of reports and reviews, such as the Khalifa review that was recently released, also feature key recommendations to enable the UK to maintain its global leadership in the fintech sector. And you will hear from our experts about all this in much more detail. But let me just set the scene by outlining a couple of features from the UK fintech sector that really stands out. First of all, the UK offers a unique combination of financial and technical talent. And today, the sector employs 76,500 people and specialists in the fintech sector. That number is set to grow to 105,000 by 2030. So lots of specialists already working in the fintech sector in the UK. Secondly, the UK has really strong investment incentives with nearly 4.3 billion worth of investment into the fintech sector in 2020. So during the pandemic, investment into the UK fintech sector continued. And third, last year, almost half of all of the fintech investment and the deals happening in the UK went directly into London. So London remains this huge, big magnet for fintech investments in the world. And when it comes to policy and regulation, the UK has set the global benchmark for policy-led innovation. We have seen key initiatives such as the regulatory sandboxes of the FCA, on which we will have a session later on in the year. We have also seen open banking. We have seen methods for how regulation can support the safe adaptation of artificial intelligence into the ecosystem. So the UK remain at the very forefront of fintech regulation. And in terms of market demand, consumers, SMEs, corporates, and governments are all key users of fintech in the UK. More than 2/3 of all the digitally active consumers out there in the UK benefit from fintech services. So during the past year, we have seen how fintech has been able to successfully adapt to the pandemic and respond to and build new services and products to meet the needs of businesses and of citizens. And on the government side, we recognize it widely that there is now perhaps the right time to build on the success and ensure that the UK maintains its leadership in the sector, as well as establishing a welcoming hub to foster innovation from abroad. So now, with no further ado, I would like to invite my colleague Filippa Martinelli to address all these topics in more detail. Welcome, Filippa. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Christina. And that was a really good overview to set the scene. I'm just going to ask if we can skip a couple of slides, please. Yeah, one more. Fabulous. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit further about the factors that have made the UK this leading hub that Christina has just talked about. And I'm going to start by talking about what fintech actually means. Can I go to the next slide, please? So here you have the breadth of technologies that we consider fintech in the UK. And this really started with things like payments, digital banking, a lot of the fintech unicorns that Christina's alluded to, the Revoluts, the Monzos, the Starlings, providing B2C consumer services. But this has really evolved in recent years into the B2B space, things like regulatory technology and the use of distributed ledger in financial institutions. Fundamentally, what we mean by fintech is the future of financial services. It's financial services done better. And it's a sector that's evolving very rapidly. This has been both an evolution based on deliberate policy and regulation, but also organic development and some core factors that exist in the UK that have enabled us to create this perfect incubation ground for fintech. Can I go on to the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk you briefly through these 6 factors, starting on the left with the sort of enabling ecosystem that we have, and then going to the right in terms of what's deliberately been done, what frameworks have been put in place to enable firms not only to start up in the UK, but also to scale up. Next slide, please. The first, as Christina mentioned, is this global financial services and technology hub. So London has the highest concentration of financial institutions globally. And this provides not only a huge opportunity pool in terms of B2B clients and partners, but also in terms of talent that's coming out of those financial institutions. Financial services firms in the UK spend around £100 billion each year on technology, which is a massive opportunity. And here we mean everything from asset managers to banks to insurance firms. There's initiatives like the FinTech Pledge, which are encouraging this adoption, helping financial institutions to understand how they interact with fintechs and how they can do so more effectively. When it comes to capital, we need capital at all stages of growth. So angel investors that put money into very early stage startups, through venture funds at the growth stage, and through into public markets. One of the recent reviews was the Lord Hill review, which looked at the listing regime in the UK and how we can facilitate that public market opportunity for firms that are really trying to reach international scale. That aside, the UK has always been seen as an attractive investment opportunity, both for domestic and overseas firms, and institutional investors from the pension fund sector and insurance sector are increasingly putting money into UK fintech. When we look at talent, obviously a pool of really strong universities in the UK, but it's not just about young and early stage talent. It's also about making sure that there is a pathway for adult learners and later stage employees to come into the fintech sector, and normalizing that view that it's not just a place for people with a background in technology, but from across different parts of the economy. Diversity is really important in other ways. And obviously post-Brexit, one of the main things we've wanted to ensure is that the UK can be home to diverse talent from around the world. And so in the budget this year, the Treasury announced a new global talent visa to enable that to continue happening. So these are some of the baseline factors that exist. But the real driving force behind fintech in the UK was the global financial crisis in 2008. We had a point of really low trust in the sector, but also of people leaving financial services jobs who'd seen financial services from the inside and thought they could do it better. We as a nation, as policymakers, as regulators, also drew conclusions that the concentration of risk and power in a small number of large institutions was a bad thing for market stability. And this was a big driver of policy and regulatory change. Next slide, please. So we had the emergence of firms between 2009 and 2010 in what was coined Silicon Roundabout, the Old Street Roundabout in Shoreditch. And around that time, the government really realized that investing in these industries of the future was a really important way to create jobs, to create a more resilient economy, and to do that for the long term. So Tech City was created around this hub, and government investment went in, and in the space of 12 months between 2010 and 11, the growth of firms was threefold, from about 200 firms operating in that area to about 600. And that was really the beginning of the strong fintech centre that we have today. Other policy initiatives, the creation of the British Business Bank in 2014. This is our economic development bank and really focuses on ensuring that SMEs have access to capital, because post GFC, traditional banks really retrenched from financing SMEs, and it was seen as a really important part of enabling economic and tech growth. Christina alluded to some of the investment schemes earlier. The Enterprise Investment Scheme, for example, enables early stage investors to gain tax incentives for investing in high risk tech firms, particularly fintech, and billions of pounds go in each year through this route into early stage businesses. The government's invested in infrastructure, so things like the faster payments system, and also open banking. So post the Competition and Markets Authority's investigation into retail banking in the UK, it was decided that enabling consumers to have better choice and an ecosystem of solutions around their current account was a way forward in terms of democratizing access. I know we'll talk more about regulation in a minute, and I know Irina's going to come on to this, but I thought I would touch briefly on what happened with the FCA. So in 2013, the former regulator, the FSA, was divested, and the FCA and the PRA were created. And when the Financial Conduct Authority was created, it was given a competition mandate, which was at the time world leading and is still quite unusual. So as well as protecting consumers and stability, the regulators themselves were there to encourage innovation, to encourage new services to come into the market, with a view that that would create better opportunities for consumers, lower prices, and therefore consumer empowerment. Another important piece from a regulatory standpoint was Project Innovate, which was created in 2014, and that was the genesis also of the regulatory sandbox, which was a real enabler in terms of fintech firms being able to interact closely with the regulators whilst building their solutions. And that's been really pivotal in the creation of things like RegTech in the UK as a national strength, but also in building firms that have resilience and compliance at their core. And finally, the work done by the bank and by the PRA on things like the new bank startup unit, which I'm sure we'll discuss more a bit later. On the international side, we began signing fintech bridges back in 2016. These are three-pillared partnerships with international markets to aid the growth of fintech between the UK and that market. So government-to-government collaboration, regulator-to-regulator cooperation, for example, the referral of firms who are regulated in one market to another, and business-to-business support. So how do we demonstrate that well-trodden path? How do we make it easier for firms to expand between two markets? We also have a financial innovation partnership with the US on a similar construct. And naturally, at the moment, as you'll all be aware, striking world-class FTAs is a major focus of the department. When you look at the CEPA we signed with Japan, for example, cross-border data was something that we enshrined in that agreement. And this is something that's really important to fintech firms when they're looking to internationalize. The DEA, similarly, that we're negotiating with Singapore, will have important agreements in there to support the growth of tech. And the regulators are doing a lot as well. The Financial Conduct Authority chairs the Global Financial Innovation Network of regulators, and the bank is soon to be host to the next BIS Innovation Hub in London. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is how we got to where we are, but it's not just London, it's about fintech across the entire country. Here on the right, you have some of the key fintech hubs pointed out. And Tech City, which I mentioned earlier, as this area in London became Tech Nation, supporting these clusters across the UK. And through the cohorts of business support, alumni include Oak North, World Remit, TransferWise. So some really big players engaging with that organisation. We've also found that the national clusters have a great economic benefit. So there's 25% higher employment and 11% higher salaries in businesses as part of a cluster, as part of one of these hubs, than those outside. And this agenda to spread prosperity and opportunity across the UK is really core to what the government is doing at the moment. Next slide, please. So, as Christina laid out at the beginning, the UK remains a global fintech capital. 11 billion in revenue to the economy each year, really high consumer adoption rate, 71% compared to the global average of 64%. But we can't really rest on our laurels, and I know that Carly will speak later about the Khalifa review and what we as policymakers and regulators can do to support the growth of the sector. When it's evolving so quickly, it's important to have policy and regulation that are adaptable enough as the sector grows and new solutions emerge to support this growth. So we continue to look at things like digital ID, like data, central bank digital currencies, ESG and financial inclusion solutions. And so I'll leave you with three themes. The first is frameworks, these regulatory and policy frameworks that I've discussed through this session. The second is growth, supporting the growth of scale-ups, growth of the UK landscape, of our talent pool, and of capital opportunities. And the third is collaboration, public-private collaboration, fintech, financial institution collaboration, but importantly, international collaboration. And so the team are here. We really want to speak with you, to share how we can help and to share more about the opportunities that you can avail of in the UK. So I'm going to leave it there, but we look forward to speaking with you further. And I'll hand over to Christina.
Yes, thank you so much, Philippa. That was really fascinating. Lots to reach out and back to us to collaborate on, I hope. So let's see how that goes. We will, in the interest of time, just move on to our next session, which is with Irina Nohogitny from the Bank of England. Irina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christina. I think the slides are gone. I don't know if we can bring them back up.
That would be nice. Meanwhile, maybe I can say to all participants that if you have questions for our speakers, please just put them in the Q&A chat next to the chat here, so that we can pick them up during the Q&A session by the end here today. So bring them on, your questions. Operator, do we have the slides? No news from operator. Ben, do we have slides? Are you able to speak without the slides, Irina? Is that possible?
Yes, I'll try to do that. Maybe halfway through the slides will come up. So hi everyone. I'm Irina Nohogitny. I'm a senior fintech expert at the Bank of England, and thank you very much to the DIT for the invitation to speak to you today about the UK's approach to fintech. So the Bank of England strategy is to enable innovation and empower competition while ensuring its core objectives of monetary and financial stability. I was going to begin with an illustration of the UK's regulatory perimeter, but I'll try to talk about it and describe what the diagram was going to show. So the regulatory perimeter is a complex concept. It's set out in several different pieces of legislation for which our finance ministry is responsible. The main perimeter consists of a very large number of firms that are primarily...
Sorry about that. I just had a few technical difficulties. I'm going to put the slides back up very shortly. I'm really sorry about that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So as I was saying, the perimeter consists of a very large number of firms that are primarily regulated by our Conduct and Market Authority, the FCA, as Philippa mentioned. There are about 60,000 firms, and this includes the smallest insurance brokers and payment service providers, some fintechs, asset managers, exchanges, UK and international banks. The PRA is part of the Bank of England, and it applies prudential supervision to about 1,500 deposit takers and insurers. We have the slides. If you could skip ahead a few slides, please. Yeah, keep going. There we go. So the big circle is the majority of the regulated firms in the UK, about 60,000 of them. Only about 1,500 deposit takers, insurers, major investment firms are regulated by the PRA as well. Or macroprudential authority, the Financial Policy Committee, is also part of the Bank of England, and it can make recommendations to change the regulatory perimeter, and it also keeps a close eye on companies just outside it. So, so this includes many fintechs amongst other types of firms. As this slide shows, the bank isn't the supervisor for most firms that are regulated in the UK, but we are responsible for monetary and financial stability as well as the safety and soundness of the firms that the PRA regulates. And as part of our financial stability mandates, we also supervise systemically important payment firms. So if you could go to the next slide, please. After sort of setting the context, what does fintech mean to a central bank? Apologies, if most times we're not the supervisor. So we monitor new technologies and developments that could impact financial stability and take actions where potential financial stability risks may arise. And there's many frameworks in place for us to do this. We recognize that innovation through fintech can change the shape of the financial system, and we do our best to import to our ways of working the best of fintech. So can we make use of our sort of better use of our data and analytic tools? Can we embrace new ways of looking at how financial services are delivered, for example, through payments? Can we use technology to enhance safety and soundness? These are the things that we think about when we think about fintech. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we've been on a journey in our approach to fintech. We started with a fintech accelerator back in 2016, which focused our learning and experimentation through proof of concepts. This was an important step for learning how to communicate, build our fintech contacts, and learn how to use new tools and technology. 2 years later, in 2018, the Fintech Accelerator became the Fintech Hub, which is my team. We moved proof of concepts to business as usual and started focusing on embedding understanding around the organization. So we worked really hard to make fintech parts of financial stability, supervision, policy, and so on. And today we're still going as the Fintech Hub, but we are seeing increasingly more mature discussions, and fintech is becoming an important part of policy debates. Payments is a great example of this. So the FBC have been thinking hard about payments innovation, including from crypto assets and stable coins. If I could have the next slide, please. So I talked about our approach, but what are we working on exactly? And in the FinTech Hub, we have 3 priorities at the moment. Central banks won't lead innovation, so we're quite happy that the private sector has the expertise for this. But what we can do is provide through our infrastructure, standards, codes, and guidance, a platform to support innovation. So in order to do this, one of our sort of first priorities is supporting safe adoption of new technology in finance. So at the bank, we are committed to supporting firms so they can safely adopt new technologies and ensure that this is done in a manner that enhances rather than detracts from financial stability. Some examples of the types of technology we're interested in is artificial intelligence, clouds, but also more broadly, we're keen to understand emerging business models, both within and outside the regulatory perimeter. And how they use new technologies and what impact that might have on financial stability. The second priority is enabling payments fit for the digital age. So payments are at the forefront of the wave of innovation that we're currently seeing. The pandemic has accentuated fears about the decline of cash and invigorated discussions around digital payments and currencies. And we're supporting work to improve existing systems. So we're keen to remove the cost, delay, and uncertainty barriers, particularly with respect to cross-border payments, while of course supporting innovation. We're continuing our multi-year research into central bank digital currencies and also monitor stablecoin developments. So yeah, stablecoins argue they could solve issues such as inclusion of the unbanked, but of course they could pose potential risks to the financial system. And sort of finally, we're influencing the interaction between the digital economy and finance. Data has the potential to create more competitive platform-based finance for SMEs, especially building on UK's experience of open banking. So the bank has been laying the foundations for an open finance, which could potentially help close the funding gap in the economy. And it could help SMEs obtain a portable credit file, as well as act as a form of digital ID. If I could have the next and final slide, please. So the very nature of commerce has been changing over the last decades as new technologies shape a new economy. And an increasing amount of activity has been taking place online as platforms have enabled direct connections between people and businesses globally. These online interactions are generating vast quantities of data that is being used to improve and personalize services. Artificial intelligence is managing a growing range of tasks, and new technologies are unbundling financial business models into their component parts and providing just more cost-effective, tailored, and inclusive services. COVID has accelerated these existing trends and is moving us closer towards a digital economy. Nearly half of the banks and insurers we surveyed over the last year reported an increase in the importance of artificial intelligence and data science applications. And we've also seen a decrease in the use of cash and an increase in online sales, which has potential implications for financial inclusion and the real possibility of people left behind in this accelerating transformation. We're very supportive of initiatives that would help support economic recovery after the current shock. And this includes ways to help manage the debt overhang from the current crisis. An open data platform for SME finance is a great example for this. So that's something that's quite close to our hearts. I'll stop here and pass on to Martin and hope to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irina. Yes, we will rush on to Martin Cook from Burges Salmon, hopefully to offer us some insight from a legal perspective, I think. Martin, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. If you could move on the slides, please. And one more. I thought I'd put this brief summary up of my career history because I've only recently joined the law firm. And I think why I mention it is to demonstrate that I've been in the position of many of you who've dialed into this call as general counsel or running legal teams. Multiple fintechs. I've been responsible for assessing and executing international expansion strategies, and also, of course, managing regulatory compliance globally for these businesses. Also, I've had a history of working alongside colleagues in industry and in governments, and that's both, in the UK, in Europe, and in the USA. I was a founding member of the UK's Fintech Delivery Panel. I've always been keen, especially for a small sector that I think has such potential and growing rapidly. I think this conversation between industry, who I guess I'm representing today, and the policymakers, the others on the call, it's so important that there's collaboration and we work effectively together to build the sector as a whole. So now I'm in a law firm. I work with fintechs looking to grow and expand, but also with banks and other large financial institutions looking to innovate. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd cover a few trends in the fintech environment. Now, I've not colluded with any of the other speakers, but actually, I guess it's reassuring that there are themes across what we're saying. I suppose, irrespective of our viewpoint on the sector, we're sort of seeing the same kind of things. Unlike maybe those in government, I'm going to mention Brexit. And obviously, financial services had a hard Brexit. So now the position for firms operating in the regulatory perimeter depends on their status prior to 31st December 2020. Nothing if not pragmatic. The current position is if firms already operating could apply to operate under a temporary permissions regime, basically carry on while they get a full license in the UK. Those European businesses who want to wind down their businesses in the UK to focus on in the EU can still have permission to wind down that through a financial services contracts regime. So the result is, if you're going to be doing new business in the UK that's in the regulatory perimeter, then you'll need to seek authorization from the Financial Conduct Authority or the PRA, depending on the business line. There are ways to expedite that, increasingly seeing use of what's called appointed representatives, which is basically partnering with a regulated firm. And that's a quick way to get to market, and we'll talk about that later. What I would say is it's not all bad. The regulatory process is well understood and is fairly efficient as these things go. And the news this week that good headway is being made in conversations between the UK and the EU towards future cooperation on financial services. So things are on track, and hopefully we'll get to the point where there is equivalence, but we will see. There's certainly plenty of people who can give advice on it. In terms of changes to the regulatory landscape, I'll mention a few. The Khalifa report, the Independent Strategic Review on FinTech, has obviously been released and is mentioned, and I won't get into that. It's a lot of detail. I'm putting some articles out on our website, but I hope we're going to see change to build on what we've seen before. Some of that may require regulatory change, should be all positive. Other regulatory changes are into the consumer lending space. We think there's likely to be legislation around the so-called buy now, pay later products, the sort of expansion of the consumer credit market regulatory regime, and also the Treasury is consulting on regulating crypto assets, particularly stable coins. So we're seeing activity in crypto asset space, which on the regulatory side, which is entirely consistent with the exponential number of inquiries and activity in that subsector. On climate change and sustainable finance, as actually already mentioned, the government's placing increasing emphasis on this, partly due to COVID and trying to build on a green recovery, and a sort of build back better strategy. And we're also seeing sustainability in terms of efforts to improve financial inclusion for the unbanked or the underserved in society. If you're familiar with the reporting requirements in the EU, they're not totally dissimilar in the UK, which is helpful. And I think what I've seen in the market is actually, whilst the government is taking a leading position on this, also pushing for changes around, especially the environmental aspect, are investors. So I guess we're all going to have our story straight in terms of playing our part in that agenda there. On data and cybersecurity, happily with the equivalence ruling, the data sharing between the UK and the EU is happily straightforward once again. And understandably, cybersecurity is a continuing key focus of the regulator. Part of their theme around operational resilience of firms, which we see cropping up all the time in recent months and years. And so they're particularly, the FCA particularly keen on cyber risk, firms managing their cyber risk, on the risks introduced by supply chains, and also on identity and access management, which picks up with a broader theme, moving into tech and innovation around digital identity. I do think there has been a lot of industry activity, and I think if we combine that with hopefully adopted recommendations from the Khalifa review, we'll start to see a real partnership between government or governmental bodies and industry to drive forward a digital identity process. Also, I can agree with Irina firsthand. COVID has accelerated the trend towards digital. When I was general counsel at World Remit, already a fast-growing business, but it was hockey stick growth during 2020 in the first half, purely pushed by the change from sort of analog to digital. And sort of with that in mind, it is no surprise that technology-enabled businesses, particularly fintechs, are taking a disproportionate share of available funding. That was true through previous years, and I think accelerated again even through into 2021. And innovation continues in industry, as already mentioned, with open banking. Activity is continuing, new use cases are being explored. At the moment, the implementation executive for open banking are looking at sweeping or variable recurring payments, which I think will unlock so much activity in the fintech space. Next slide, please. So whilst I would have loved the UK to stay a member of the EU, no one else on the panel can say that, I am pleased to say that I still really believe the UK is a great place to do business. And some of these reasons have been given already. But on fintech particularly, you know, I've worked in the fintech industry for 8 or 9 years. We really have a vibrant ecosystem. There's strong industry representation, large talent pool drawing from the UK domestically, but also the UK or London particularly as a hub for global talent. And we have a regulatory environment which can be tough, but it is stable and it's certainly progressive. And I've got direct personal experience of dealing with certain European regulatory authorities, and it is like night and day, the comparison, to be honest, to the benefit of the UK. So, so I think whilst there are obviously big success stories, and the names of some of those have been mentioned, those standout firms, there is a lot of sort of grassroots and scaling activity through the UK, which I think is really exciting. And this, the clusters that are put on the screen earlier really are representative of industry activity across the UK. Next slide, please. Now, based on my past experience of working in fintechs, you don't make an expansion or investment decision lightly. You need a good methodology and approach. When I was doing this in the fintechs I worked in, we used to assess expansion based on the commercial proposition. So looking at market demand and competition in the market. We looked at the regulatory environment and mandatory compliance requirements. So does my product work in that market? What are the minimum changes I need to make to my product to make it work? And also operational practicalities. Some are around language and culture, but also on data and data sources. We ruled out expansion to certain countries just because we couldn't get the right data, which is really important when you're looking at algorithmic based lending or the use of big data or machine learning. So, I won't go through this list. I mean, there's plenty of people who can advise, obviously myself included, but usually the path is to test the market from a regulatory perspective for a fintech regulated product. The first question we're always asked, or 80% of the time, is this regulated in the UK or not? So the perimeter analysis, because that describes the path to follow. If it is within the regulatory perimeter, as I mentioned earlier, there are quicker ways to get into market, to put out your MVP. Often that's using an appointed rep route, but actually depending on the activity, whether it's payments at the lighter end or banking at the other end, you can be talking between 3 months to 12 months for authorization, which actually, compared to other regulators around the world, is actually not that bad. A couple of other things to note. I mentioned data already, which is key. That's a good change recently. There's continued changes around visas to the benefit of the fintech sector, and a small point on IP. Given Brexit, you may well have protection for your brand in the EU, but if you're a newish company, you'll need to separately think about the UK for that. Obviously, something you wouldn't have had to do before. What I would say is that a number of these points are also picked up in the Khalifa review, which I think Carly will talk more about, around tax efficient schemes, funding, the gap for scale ups in funding. So actually, we know these issues are important, and it's been recognised in the review that they're important as well. So I'm really positive about that. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just a bit of an advert, so do forgive me. But I think some of the interest we've seen from overseas, sort of UK investment recently, has actually been quite broad. We've looked at, we've been speaking on supporting African banks and money remitters who are looking to the UK, not actually for regulated business, but to use it as a hub for data science and technology and innovation to plug into that aspect of the ecosystem. And then for a Mexican fintech who actually want to use the UK, again, not for business, but to access global capital markets investment and funding. And then we have others from the Netherlands or Italy, crypto currencies or asset managers who would be looking to actually do business in the UK with like consumer business. So actually it's quite an exciting time. And I suppose the message I can say, I suppose representing industry, is there's a lot of people who are able to provide support to incoming businesses. And we'd be delighted, all of us, I mean, collectively, to see you try to come to the UK. That's me done now. So I'll be taking questions later happily, but over to Carly if she's
Super. Thank you so much, Martin. Yes, in the interest of time, Carly, I think from Carly Nimmo from HM Treasury will be joining us by phone. I think, Carly, are you with us?
I just need to do a quick mic check with Carly. Just are you able to speak, please, Carly, first?
Yep. Hi, this is Carly.
Hi, you okay? Can you hear us all right?
Yes. Yeah, no problems at all.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay. So yeah, do you want me to just go to the next slide here, Carly, or?
Yes, I think first slide is what makes UK fintech different.
Yep, there you go.
Perfect, thank you. And apologies that IT has meant that I've had to dial in this morning, but it's really nice to speak to everyone. In the interest of time, quite happy to skip through a lot of the content because I think a lot of the strengths of the UK will have been very well covered by others. I think just key to note here, I'm going to cover on some of the kind of priorities for Treasury that have kind of helped us set the current landscape and what we're thinking about going forward. And this slide just kind of sets out some of the things that we are thinking about when we're creating those foundations for growth. And then if we jump to the second slide on competition. So again, this just sets out some of Treasury's rationale for the role of competition in improving services for consumers and businesses, and that's something that's never overlooked when we're setting policy and regulatory strategy. So my role in Treasury is very much around both fintech and wider competition in financial services, and a lot of the steps that Treasury and successive governments have taken in recent years have been with the overarching aim of opening up the market and supporting the growth of new firms to challenge some of the incumbent firms, rather than focused solely on that development of innovation and technology, which I think is a really important marriage if we're to see innovation and fintech continue to flourish in the UK. Next slide is on legislative change. So again, just very briefly, successive governments since 2010 have taken some really specific steps to foster an environment, both through regulation and legislation, to help fintechs to grow. And that slide just kind of sets out some of the things that we've done, that I'm sure others have already covered. So jumping on to the next slide on regulation specifically. Again, I think everyone is probably really familiar with what the Financial Conduct Authority have done here, given they've kind of set a global precedent that is very closely looked at by others. But key things are the regulatory sandbox. I think worth noting that that idea is evolving, and in 2020, the FCA launched a digital sandbox pilot. And that's something that, again, is the world's first and aims to deliver the kind of next phase of support by providing firms increased access to synthetic data sets to enable them to further test and validate their solutions. And that's very much in recognition of the fact that access to data is one of the key challenges that we discussed with fintech firms over the past few years. And this is why the digital sandbox is being developed, and we'll see that further evolve throughout the rest of this year. Martin, you helpfully pointed towards the COLIFA review. Worth noting that the further development of the sandbox is one of the recommendations within that review, and that is being further considered just now. I'm sure that, Avina, you have already touched on the bank's work, so quite happy to skip on to the next slide on open banking and smart data. And I think, Avina, you'd also touched on open banking as well, but just kind of worth noting that we're now considering, we're now kind of reaching the completion of the rollout of the UK's open banking standard, and we are considering what steps come next. The FCA recently consulted on open finance and around kind of extending the principles of open banking to a wider range of products and services, and we're thinking about what comes next in that space. Last year, the government also committed to passing primary legislation that would enable us to mandate participation in smart data initiatives, including open finance. So the framework is definitely being developed. Next slide is on the fintech sector strategy, which was launched in 2018. I think worth just noting that was very much about recognition of the UK kind of establishing ourselves as global leaders in fintech, but this was around identifying what priority areas there are for future growth. Two key points to highlight from that was the creation of the Crypto Asset Task Force, which comprised of Treasury, the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority, to explore the impact of crypto assets and the potential benefit and challenge of using that technology within financial services. And since the launch of the task force, we've taken a number of steps to foster growth in that area. Earlier this year, Treasury published a consultation on the regulatory treatment of crypto assets, primarily focused on stablecoin. That's now closed, and we're considering responses and will outline next steps in due course. And I think if we move on to the next slide around partnerships, so that was another key theme that came from the strategy, and the output has been the creation of the Fintech Pledge, which is another world first for the UK Fintech sector. It's delivered by a structure that we have called the Fintech Delivery Panel, which brings industry together with Fintech firms to overcome barriers to growth. But the pledge is a voluntary commitment from its signatory firms to implement specific principles to support fintechs to partner with larger institutions for mutual benefit and growth. And then if we skip ahead, quite happy to skip the slide on the Fintech Delivery Panel. Next slide is on the Khalifa review, which Martin, you helpfully pointed out. I think key thing is that review is very much around creating the right business and financial services environment for fintechs to scale. That's why the Chancellor commissioned Ron Khalifa to carry out the review and to identify opportunities for growth across those 5 priority areas. We are now considering everything that's in there. There's a lot of excellent ideas that we will think about how we take forward. Specifically, there is a proposal for a regulatory skill box, which is aimed at supporting fintechs reaching scale to grow further. So we're working with industry and with regulators around what that might mean in practice. Conscious we're now over time, so quite happy to kind of wrap up there and take any questions with the others.
Thank you so much, Carly. Yes, I think that in the interest of time, we are all busy people. We will have a really abbreviated Q&A session because there's just one burning question for Martin in the chat, which is if you could talk a little bit about what the key differences are in your experience between UK and European regulators.
Sure. I mean, I suppose I'm going to talk generically. I mean, not all regulators in Europe, in the EU, are the same. But I think a number of the regulators are quite analog still. Maybe if I think to the Spanish regulator, there still seems to me, based on what I'm used to, quite an emphasis on form over substance, whereas the UK is a principle-based regulation, which can sometimes be a bit difficult to work your way through the principles, but there's a sort of pragmatic approach to regulation, whereas there's a lot of formality and a lot of bureaucracy in some of the other regulators, and a lot of like sort of pointless legal hurdles around notarization, documents, apostillation, etc. So the bureaucratic side is there. Also, I think probably some of the regulators are just quite negative on fintech or nervous about fintech. And I was at a conference in London a few years ago, and a spokesperson for BaFin basically called anyone who works in fintech unprofessional. I did at the time, and I was amazed to say it publicly. Now, maybe they might say, well, they've been proven right because of Wirecard and maybe, to an extent, Greensill in the UK. But I think it's a bit simplistic to categorize a whole bunch of people by their just because of where they choose to work and the things they're trying to do. Also, I think some of the regulators are not sure how, and I saw this maybe in some of my work with the Commission, although not a regulator, obviously relevant for policy, in terms of how to categorize certain fintech activity when it doesn't fit in the traditional sort of product boxes. So I just, it's not that the relationship with the FCA, for example, is always straightforward, and I've had healthy and robust conversations with them in the past. But I think there's a good effort, in my experience in the UK, in terms of policymakers trying to understand what industry is doing. So when I was in industry, I used to have regular meetings at Treasury, so with Carly's predecessor, to just talk through in detail the business model and learnings and market viewpoint from industry to help them understand what was happening and where we're coming from, which I think informed policy making. We really struggled to get those meetings, and we tried to get them. We really struggled to get those meetings in the Netherlands and in Germany, even with our Dutch and German businesses. So I think some of this is maybe it's new, they're not quite sure how to deal with it, it doesn't fit in a box. There's probably a slight, in elements, a bit of prejudice about it. And I think on the other side, the UK I've found personally to be much more open and collaborative through government and policymakers to regulator and down into industry.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Martin, Philippa, Irina, and Carly, for all your insight and your knowledge about the fintech sector in the UK. If you need to, well, this was a pretty short Q&A session, so if you need to get in contact with any of us, please do refer back to the event and registration page for this event. We really would like to hear from you. We will always also be back with more information about other events that we're doing. We're talking about the next event around regulatory sandboxes, and we will of course share the recording of this webinar so that you can see it again and hear it again. I wish you all a really good day or evening wherever you are, and hope to see you all and hear from you again soon. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris.